Gracie Jiu Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 115 of the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today my guest will be Professor Eli Knight, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, let's start with our martial arts quote. And this one's from Bruce Lee. To me, the extraordinary aspect of martial arts lies in its simplicity. The easy way is also the right way. And martial arts is nothing at all special. The closer to the true way of martial arts, the less wastage of expression there is. Again, that's from Bruce Lee, and I think that's a really great martial arts quote in general, but can certainly be applied to jiu-jitsu for sure. All right, I'm fortunate today to have on the show Professor Eli Knight of Knight Jiu-Jitsu. And Eli is a second-degree Royce Gracie Black Belt and instructor. And he's the senior supervising instructor of Three Rivers Martial Arts Academy. He's known the world over for his incredible teaching ability through his various seminars, as well as his very, very popular YouTube channel, Knight Jiu Jitsu. So I know you're going to enjoy this interview. After the interview, make sure you stay tuned for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without further ado, let's talk to Eli. All right, I'm speaking with Eli Knight, second-degree Royce Gracie Black Belt and professor and senior supervising instructor of Three Rivers Martial Arts Academy in Kentucky. He also is known very much for his YouTube channel, Knight Jiu Jitsu, and we'll be talking about that. But welcome, Eli. It's nice to talk to you today.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me on. This is great.
My pleasure, man. I've been following your work for quite some time. Very interesting stuff. So, a big fan. So it's good to be able to talk to you.
Well, thank you.
So, a lot of stuff I want to cover, but let's just start by what led you to. It's always interesting to find out what led people to jiu-jitsu. So, what led you to jiu-jitsu, and how did you actually get started with it?
Well, let's see. I started out a long time ago. I've always described my journey as pretty geographically challenged because I'm in Kentucky, and a long time ago when I started, it was just taekwondo classes, karate classes, and so I started in that. And I met a gentleman named Jason Hawkins who was cross training in ways that a lot of people weren't doing back then. I mean, he was doing Jeet Kune Do. His background was in jiu-jitsu, but it was more traditional jiu-jitsu, even though it had more of a Filipino flair to it. And he was doing, like I said, Jeet Kune Do, Filipino martial arts, silat, all kinds of stuff. And it was just really intriguing to me. So I kind of jumped ship on taekwondo and went with him. And I just fell in love with jiu-jitsu, even that element of jiu-jitsu and judo. And then, of course, this was like the early 90s, and it was right around the time that the UFC 1 hit. And that was, of course, most of the world's exposure to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu through watching, Royce in the early UFCs. And even though we were doing jiu-jitsu and I was, advancing through the ranks by that time, it was like, oh, this is different. This is different than the jiu-jitsu that we're doing. And so, we started to, I affectionately call it stalk Royce around the nation. Whenever we could find a seminar that he was doing or a training camp or anything. Some of the guys actually went to Torrance when he was teaching at a Gracie Academy. he started to recognize us just through so many visits, and we became an affiliation under Gracie Academy, and did a lot of training in the early days with Royce and Horion, and we even got a chance to a couple of chances to train with Grandmaster Elio.
Nice.
And yeah, it was amazing back in that time. And Kaiki, Carlos Enrique Elias, was teaching out at Gracie Academy at that time too. This is when Henry and Huron were they were pretty young. They were probably not even teenagers back then. So, but yeah, it was an interesting journey. And then we've been with Royce as a flagship network in his association or in his network since then, and it's been over a couple of decades.
That's cool. It's always cool to talk to people that were around when the UFCs started. A lot of people, of course, got interested from seeing the UFCs, but for someone who was already kind of practicing and just in it from that long, and then to be able to be at the hotbed, the Gracie Academy with so many great people at one time before several people went their own ways, but that had to be really exciting.
It is. It's exciting to think back on. It makes for some really good memories, and just really interesting things to think back on. Like, wow, I just remembering like training in those environments and just how different things are now. How similar things are too, but how different and fragmented some things are now too. But it is interesting to think back on, and it's just really cool to see the evolution. And something I think that gets overlooked a lot of the time is that that people who were training, regardless of what they were training in back then, when the UFC happened, it's kind of like they had to make a decision. Everybody in the martial arts world had to make a decision. And it was like, okay, are you going to bury your head in the sand and say that your martial art that you've been training in that has just been really systematically picked apart through this case study of the Ultimate Fighting Championship and just dismantled in front of you, are you going to bury your head in the sand and make excuses for it? Or are you going to accept the shortcomings of it and supplement Gracie Jiu-Jitsu with what you're doing? Or are you just going to go with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and study it and really find out what it's more about, which is what a lot of people did. Or there's some combination of the two, but everybody had to make notice of it. Definitely. Everybody had to wake up and say, okay, this is important. We have to do something with this information. And the saddest thing is the people who just doubled down on things they were doing that were proven to be pretty much ineffective and
right.
Just kept their heads in the sand.
Like I'll never go to the ground. I'll just won't be taken to the ground. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's funny. It's crazy. It's crazy to me that argument still is out there. Like, well, we just train not to go to the ground. We train to end it standing. It's like, man, great. Like if you've got that much control and you can dictate where the fight goes,
right?
Then fantastic, man. How about you just don't get in fights, period?
Exactly.
Like if you have that much control. But
what do you remember being the first thing you noticed about Royce, and what stands out about of what he was doing? What really stands out? The first thing you remember?
Well, I mean, I guess watching him, everybody had like initial impressions just from watching him on television, on pay-per-view, and watching him in the fights. And he got a very stern, serious, like demonic look on his face sometimes when he was fighting, and he could be very scary, very intimidating, and he still can be face to face and in person. But when you meet him, and this is how it is with so much of the Gracie family, that Gracie family members, when you meet them, they're very affable, they're very approachable, they're very friendly and welcoming in and everything. I mean, the running joke is my friend.
Right.
It's such a warm, open group. So it was that approachability of him, that welcoming, that attentiveness, and the teaching ability. I mean, that's the most important thing about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is the teaching methodology. And I think that any Gracie family member will say that is how it's taught, how the information is conveyed, and to see how good of a teacher that Royce and Horion were. Horion, who, I probably had more experience speaking the language than he did, and he's speaking as a second language and has a better command over it than I've ever heard of anyone back in the 90s, listening to him. And it was just incredible to see how they conveyed the information, not just verbally, not just kinesthetically, anything. It was they knew how to get it across, and everybody in the room could tell.
I agree.
That's something really cool.
They have a phrase they use, teaching to the lowest common denominator, which means really ensuring everybody gets it at that level they need to. And back to what you said, they have a great ability to make you feel special. You can be in a room of however many, and they're just so, like you said, my friend, but the energy they exude, it makes you feel like, wow, you know, they're glad I'm here kind of thing. It's really great traits they have.
It is. That's something that I've tried to emulate as best I can whenever, like, over the years, because I notice how important that is. And I mean, if ultimately that's why we should be teaching. Like, ultimately, if you're going to teach us, that's why you should be teaching, because you care about other people. It's not because you just want to stand up and show off how much information you have and how much you know. And that's what happens a lot of times when people start out early teaching, and some people never grow out of it, I believe. And I think everybody has a tendency to fall back on it and slip back into that, and it's a bad habit. But I think ultimately, if you're going to be a teacher, it has to stop being about you, and it needs to start being about those people in that room. And that means that you need to help them receive this information that can potentially be something that enhances their life, you know? So I think that's what I fell in love with.
That's huge, man. That is huge, because great instructors, you know, they get away from the ego-driven notion of it's about me, and I have so much to give you, and you need to listen. And it's different approaches, obviously, but the more you make it about the student, and you're wanting to make them a better person on and off the mat, and really, you know, they may have the body style that lends itself to certain things that's not your favorite game, but a good instructor will know that and help them to have a finely tailored suit, if you will, of jiu-jitsu, instead of just a carbon copy of what works for the instructor.
Exactly. That's and I think you really hit on it right there, man, because it's so much of the time you have some people that are phenomenal competitors, some people who are phenomenal fighters, but they only know how to do what they do. And a lot of it is just like kind of an inherent knowledge. They don't have, like, they can't convey that information. You know, I use the analogy of, like, you don't ask the gorilla the best way to eat a banana. You know, it's like he may be the best at it, but he's not going to be able to convey that information. So you can study people, and you can get a lot out of studying people, but a lot of times if they don't have the ability to convey that information. And then on the flip side, you can have, you know, I'm not the best competitor in the world. I don't have the most illustrious, like, competition career or anything. I've won some and lost some, but it's like anything that I can do, I can explain to you how to do it, you know, and that might not be a lot, but I can explain to you how to do it in a pretty analytical way that I'm going to listen and watch you and try to help you through it. And so I feel like that's my role as a teacher, what it needs to be. So I try my best always to do that. That's
great. Love that, man. So let's go back to your journey. So that's how you got started. So tell us how you kind of went from there and where it took you through the years.
Well, it's because we were, like I said, geographically challenged, and we didn't have, it wasn't as if, you know, we were any of us, and we had this core group that has stuck together for a long time. I'm still with the gentleman I mentioned, Jason Hawkins, who I met back in the day that turned me on to jiu-jitsu. Like, we still teach out of the same place every day together. And, you know, this has been like 2.5 decades we've been together or so. But, you know, so we would go to seminars, we would travel however we could, you know, with, you know, keeping life and everything else going on. So we had a pretty slow road as far as advancing through the ranks. If you really kind of look at the time that it took us to go from white to black belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, it was about 15 to 16 years. And that's a little longer than average. Like, typically now you'll hear 10 years, I think, being fairly average. Some people, you know, go much faster, some people a little longer. But as far as, like, rank and everything, progression, that was kind of the journey, you know. But it was interesting because I was a teenager whenever I started in it. So I went from, you know, high school days and getting a part-time job and, you know, trying to fit in training with all that and training as much all the time that I could. And then, you know, life happens and, you know, you get married and you have kids and you go to college, maybe not necessarily in that order, but it's always been something that I've tried to keep consistent as a part of my life. And I'm still pretty proud that, like, there hasn't been more than, I think, 3 weeks in a row, and that was around the time that my daughter was born, that I've gone without training. So there's never really been any, like, time off that I've had to take. But as far as, like, the other elements of the journey and everything, it's you know, that I've oscillated between, you know, sportive and self-defense and more MMA style training. And I love all of it. I love all the totality of what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu offers to all the different modalities that you can kind of travel through, because it has something that appeals to all of them. And Royce is very big on promoting, just like most of the Gracie family is, I'm promoting the foundational self-defense above everything else. And I firmly agree with that. But, there's other elements of the sport that, he may be opposed to, or other people may be opposed to, that I'm absolutely fascinated with. I don't see the harm in it, as long as you can compartmentalize and you can contextualize, and you don't have some kind of fallacious argument of like, well, if you do this, then you're not going to be able to do this, or if you concentrate too much on this, then you're going to lose sight of this. I think if you have a good head on your shoulders, you can practice the totality of it.
I agree completely. Yeah, some people get locked into that's one or the other. If your goal is to be, world-class competitor, you're probably going to spend most of your time that you have to that kind of training, and not so much self-defense. And then there's some people, the Valencia brothers and other people are very, very heavily self-defense, not as much, in kind of rolling or competition, that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of people in the middle. But what I've seen you do well, and others too, and I know Henner and Hedron you mentioned are very, very focused on this, is bridging kind of, you've got your stand-up self-defense stuff, and then you've got the rolling, but bringing those together and, punching and stuff like that within the grapple training. A lot of places you don't see those two. They may teach self-defense, but it's over here, and then they do the rolling, but they don't bridge those very well. So I've seen you do that in some of your videos and focus on that. I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I like that element of it, and I think that's something that people have started kind of identifying me with. Like if there's, because like there's nothing that really makes me special in one area, but like if there's something that people have kind of identified me with, it's the tying those elements together and showing like how something that is typically considered a sportive move actually has its roots or its application in a self-defense context potentially, and vice versa. You can have something that people look at and it typically looks more like a self-defense or fighting kind of move outside of competition, but it's like, hey, this is. I recently did Bernardo Faria did a video with me on his channel with me and Jerrod Jessup, and that was kind of the discussion we were having, and I showed him kind of the systematic approach that I've been using. And this is not something I don't ever want to make it sound like I make anything up. I don't invent anything. It's just like stuff is taught to me, and I put it together how it works for me and how I see the ties fit together. So just showing kind of the systematic approach that I've been using for side control escapes, and how with just like slight little modifications or slight little shifts in perspective, you're accounting more for striking situations, and not just for the guys passing your guard, and not just for, he's trying to establish this and get points on you or whatever. And, you can do the same thing with gi and no gi considerations. And, so just knowing how to adapt those things. And I think that just comes with like time in, and seeing things presented in a lot of different ways and over the years. And I think that's the beautiful part of it, because, it's like you're saying, if I want to be the next, like world champion, then I'm going to really have to heavily focus on very specific elements of the game, and really, focus, especially if it's in the gi, very, very sport competitive like movements and everything. But it doesn't like mean that some of those things are not rooted in like the old style of jiu-jitsu, because even competition comes from the idea of that positional hierarchy, the idea of what's going to work in a fight. That's why points are awarded in the way that they're awarded. Right. You get 4 points for the most dominant positions that you can get into. You get points for, the upgrading positions and getting yourself out of bad ones,
Yeah, I want to get more into that and ask you about some specific positions and submissions and get some details about that in a moment. But let's talk a little bit about, I read where you were bullied as a child, so I want to hear a little bit about that and if how that's affected or shaped your philosophy in teaching children.
Yeah, I did a couple of things. I did a couple of interviews like with different. One was with Jiu Jitsu Times a while back, and then one was with another podcast. It was David Wells, and that was the topic because I've done a lot of work with kids over the years, and especially on the bullying subject, anti-bullying stuff, and doing different things with them over the years. It's changed how I view a lot of things initially, and my approach to dealing with kids in those kind of like situations. I don't feel like I had it like that was the thing that comes up initially, is like when you're talking in those contexts is like, well, were you bullied as a child, and like what was the nature of it, and this and that. I don't feel like, there were instances, but there was not something that was continually ongoing for a very long time. Everybody dealt with bullies to some extent, or with bullying to some extent. I didn't have it worse than anybody else. Just something people have to overcome. The worst things for me growing up, as far as that feeling of like helplessness and weakness and everything that bullying tends to do, was watching like some like domestic abuse issues with my mother, and someone that she was with like after my parents were divorced and things like that. And so that really shaped, more than anything, I think what training jiu-jitsu, training martial arts in general, like did for me is empowering me and giving me confidence again, and making me feel worth something, and having some kind of self-worth and self-value. And so that's the story that to me is more powerful than any like actual kids bullying me during school, because that was where I felt the most insignificant, the most helpless, was when you see your mother being physically harmed by another person, and you're not equipped in physically or any other way to do anything about it, and that was a difficult part for me.
Did that, so I experienced the same thing. So, and if you don't have a good outlet for the anger that wells up, because it's so frustrating that if you can't stop it or do anything about it, what did you do with that?
Well, it wasn't constructive at first. Like it was, I had, some troubled parts of my adolescence. I think I was always a pretty good kid, but I got in some trouble, like whenever I was younger. I went out and did destructive things, and went stupid places with stupid people, and did some stupid stuff, and I didn't do anything like super illegal. I never got into drugs or anything like that, but I was very self-destructive, and I didn't know how to turn with that. And so I always just kind of just trying to fill that void. And then a couple years later, after becoming getting a little older, and then my sister passed away, and I was just kind of left in this funk at a point in my life. And this was right before I started any martial arts at all. And a buddy of mine talked me into going to some of his taekwondo classes with him and stuff like that. And then it gave me an outlet. It wasn't a perfect outlet. I enjoyed it, but more than anything, it was just a distraction. So whenever I found jiu-jitsu, I actually had something that a little more therapeutically helped me to make sense of some of the chaos that I experienced in my life. Right. Like you have this like chaotic, like nothing really means anything, is this like very nihilistic feeling about everything. It's like, man, I've lost the most important person in my life, and I've had to see, my mom go through this, and I'm helpless. What am I supposed to do? Who am I ever supposed to be or amount to? And then, to me, jiu-jitsu is like, because of the nature of it, because of like, if you get metaphorical about it, and how you solve problems in jiu-jitsu, and how you experience reactions, and how you deal with your karma of making bad decisions instantly in the moment, and you see, ultimately it's the ultimate karma experience. You see how you treat people and the result that it has, and you see like how you demand people treat you, and the result that has. And so that kind of gave me this therapeutic outlet that I never probably would have otherwise known existed. I didn't have that from any other source in my life. So, I mean, that was truly life-saving to me. And that's the biggest thing, getting back to what you originally said, something about bullying, that I try to impress upon the kids. It's not like, some kids need to be coddled. Some kids need to be like woken up, and some kids need to be handled sternly. And it depends on the personality. And that's why it's a difficult thing. It's a delicate thing, because you don't want to break a kid, you don't want to break them psychologically or emotionally, and you also don't want to over coddle them in today's environment, So giving them the awareness that look, you need to demand people treat you a certain way. And the best way to do that is first figure out that you need to treat people a certain way, and on the flip side of that, demand that they do not treat you a certain way, and that you refrain from treating other people a certain way, That's at the base level, the most basic element to bullying and anti-bullying. That's it right there, in my opinion.
You said something big with the there's different types of kids who need different approaches, right? One size doesn't fit all. I mean, for some kids and adults, if you say you can't do something, you can't do that, and it challenges them, and they're like, oh, well, yes, I can. I'll show you, and it motivates them.
Yeah.
Others, you say that and just crushes them. They believe you, like, I can't do that, and they need some, a much more of a comforting type, motivating strategy, right? Yeah. And of course, you don't know what everybody needs instantly when you start teaching kids, but just being aware of that going into it and being able to start kind of recognize the individual differences. But I also think you said a big thing with the confidence you gain, not only just the outlet you get, but the confidence you gain through jiu-jitsu. Very different than some of the stuff you're seeing today, widespread, where everybody's supposed to get a trophy and all that. I'm not going to get too much into that, but self-esteem for the sake of self-esteem only is one thing, but self-esteem you get and the confidence you get from doing something like jiu-jitsu and building that within yourself is, man, it's priceless.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny you bring that up too, because that's the biggest challenge of teaching, period, is this stuff is not meant to be taught to groups. Like I firmly believe over the years after all the teaching, it is taught to groups, and it's the most predominant way that we do it. I mean, hell, I go do seminars, and I teach classes of groups of people and everything more than I teach private lessons, but I do teach a lot of private lessons. But it's meant to be conveyed more one-on-one, because you need to know about that person before you can have that exchange and that interaction and truly get it across to them the best as possible. Because otherwise, like we had mentioned before, about you have to teach the lowest common denominator of that class. And lowest common denominator doesn't mean what the least able person in the room is able to do. It just means the lowest common denominator. So some people are going to get lost on both ends,
True.
But, you want to hit that middle ground. But, it is, you have to figure out, though, if you're really going to effectively teach somebody or help somebody or share this information with somebody, how it's going to be best perceived. And, there's some adults, individuals, kids, whoever, you need to be more stern with them and more firm in the way that you handle them. And other ones, you have to be very careful. You have to be very delicate with how you handle the verbiage and the transformation or the transfer of information. A good example I like to use is if I have a kid, and let's say my kid is 5 or 6 years old, and they're about to do something that they're about to touch an insect or something, or they're about to touch a bee. I might say, oh no, don't do that, and like move their hand away gingerly and be like, no, and then try to explain that's going to hurt, don't do that. But if that same kid is like 10 feet away from me and about to walk out into traffic, I'm not going to be like, oh, now, sweetie, don't do that. There's
exactly.
No, you're going to be like, oh, hey, get back here. You're going to snap at that kid and you're going to yell, because you want to shock them into understanding the urgency of the situation. So it's like that. When you see somebody do something that's going to get them into like serious trouble if they continue to do it like that, maybe you don't need to be the most gingerly approach to that. Right. You need to impress upon them the urgency of that situation. So anyway, that might have derailed a little bit.
No, I completely agree with that. There's times when you need to be directive. There's times when you can use open-ended questions and things like that and get people to kind of think for themselves. And there's times when you need to impart knowledge directly for the sake of time or the situation like you just described. It's got to be done.
Yep.
All right. So I've seen that you're doing a lot of seminars, it seems like, lately. Very very popular with the seminars. I've seen that you're doing a lot of women empowerment type seminars, police, and then it looks like one of your popular subjects of a seminar is knee on belly. I've seen a lot of those lately. So I'd love to go to one of those of yours. I think that's a really cool thing. So I'd like for you to share a little bit about knee on belly. Okay. And getting back to what we were talking to earlier, then I want to go through a series of positions and or submissions and just have you talk about, in your opinion, what's the most important thing or element about that, or what people should know or remember about these positions, and what details are frequently overlooked or misunderstood, and how do these positions or submissions change in a street or self-defense situation compared to competition. So let's just start with knee on. Describe
like my perfect conversation right there.
All right, well, let's start with knee on belly, man. Go with it.
All right. So, knee on belly, I show a lot. I've got several like videos and, tutorials and stuff out on that. And it's one of my favorite positions. Like, we're taught not to have favorites. You're supposed to kill your darlings and stuff. You don't have favorites. You just go where the fight takes you and yada, yada. But,
right.
if The reason I say it's one of my favorites is because I love to play in the transitions and the transitional positions. And I refer to knee on belly as a transitional position because it's not quite side control, it's not quite mount, it's not quite standing, it's not quite ground. It's got all these different elements of it. So you have stability, but you have mobility. You have a good amount of space where you can elicit a lot of responses that will lead to certain kind of like submission attacks and opportunities. If it's a gi or no gi situation, straight grappling, there's a lot of submission opportunities from it, and there's a lot of upgrade opportunities. If this is a more of a striking situation, more MMA style, you can strike from there very effectively. And even if you need to like disengage and get back to standing range, I love to teach it with law enforcement seminars because it's a great position for them because they don't have to have quite as much commitment as they would in like mount or side control, and then attach themselves to stuck to somebody where if there was outside interference or a weapon was produced or some other consideration, they still have the ability to control that person, whether it's a suspect or something else. Then they can control that person in a lot of ways, and they can use a lot of different tactics, but they also have the ability, if they need to get up, to disengage, to surveil the crowd, to make sure that, everything is in order. So, I mean, it has so much versatility in so many different ranges. That's why I've spent more time. And just in my own, like, personal practice, I find myself, like, just, off of maybe because of the guard passing style that I have, or maybe because of my mount sucks sometimes and I wind up dismounting to knee on belly. But whatever is the case, I play that position a lot, and I just see a lot out of it. And I think those transitional positions are ultimately what's going to really color the style that people will develop, because we all will develop our own personal style to some degree. And when you play in transitions, that's going to really tell you what your style is going to be more than the positions. Because a mount is a mount, side control is a side control, whatever. You can have influence and you can have your own style about it to an extent, but it's really the movements between. There's a quote that I always screw up, but it's really good. It was a famous pianist, and he was asked what makes him great, and he said, "Well, the notes I handle like any other performer, but it's the pauses in between the notes." Yes. And that right there, I don't know if you know who said that, but
no, I have heard it, but I don't know who it was, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, it speaks volumes, and that's how I feel about jiu-jitsu, honestly.
Nice. And thinking about knee on belly or knee right, what's something common you see that's missed or not done as well as it could be generally?
I think knee on belly, there's a time to smash with it. There's a time to grind and to smash and everything else. But I think that it's easy for people to get a little too focused on that. And I think that sometimes it needs to be played more mobile and not, you definitely see it like effectively used if you watch a really aggressive player, and I think I can kind of picture for some reason in my head, like people who have used it aggressively in the past, maybe like Cyborg or, somebody like that. But, where they get there and they just squish the guts out of the person until the person just sticks some arms or legs in the way, and then, they're caught in submission. But, I think that there's definitely some very effectiveness in riding like a little more perpendicular of shin across, because rather than going pinpoint with knee to diaphragm, if you go a little more shin across the hip points or a little more like contact with that shin, you feel the subtle weight changes, and if you're too tense, you're too smashing, you're too tight, you're not going to feel those subtle little nuances and shifts of weight and movement that are going to really tell you what the intention of that person who's on bottom is trying to do. So you're going to miss a lot of data collection points that you could really be picking up on. That's going to tell you the next best, most efficient thing. So I think that, maybe that, if that answers the question.
It does. Okay, what about with kimuras? Maybe your favorite setup, and then what are some details that people generally could be better at or maybe miss?
I think with kimura is kimura and omoplata both. Like those were things where, like, I feel like when I came across those, it changed my perspective of what a submission versus a position and like where those kind of overlapped. So what I mean is, like, when you start to see something like a kimura, then in this really strong double wrist lock position, if you start to view that more as a position than just a submission, there's a lot more opportunity to be had of it. And that's why you hear it like so popular nowadays, the phrase, I think, kind of coined by David Avalon, called kimura trap, or the kimura trap system.
Right.
So it's like you set this trap and you lock it in, and then you see this person, how are they going to maneuver around this trapped limb now? And so, and then based on that, it's going to determine, can you bridge them over? Can you sweep them? Can you reverse them? Can you finish from this certain position? Can you take their back with it? And there's so much opportunity off of that. As far as my personal, like if I had to have a favorite, like where I use kimura more than anything, is typically if I'm playing like a knee shield. I love the knee shield position because it leads me into kimura opportunity, but also to deep half. And I like to play deep half a lot. But when people are trying to deal with that knee shield position, a lot of times they're going to give you a good opportunity to set up a kimura. And if they keep pressing forward, you're going to have the ability to finish that kimura or to bridge them over and get on top. If they set the weight back, you have the opportunity to like reestablish some kind of guard or half guard, or maybe even take their back off of a transition. So that right there would be my favorite use for it typically. But man, it's so versatile, so good.
It is. And one detail I'd heard a long time ago, but I don't think it really kind of hit home until I was looking at one of your videos recently, and that it doesn't always have to be fully locked up with, the double grab, right? Sometimes if you just have a shoulder and the wrist, and as long as you're applying the opposing forces correctly, you can get it without totally locked up, right?
Yeah, I actually got that detail from, if I'm not mistaken, I remember watching something that Henner was actually showing on video, and he was talking about that. It may have been something out of their combatives or something, but it was really interesting because I hadn't ever heard it explained quite like that before either. But you get there a lot of times, and people focus so much on the shape of wrapping through, grabbing your own wrist and grabbing their wrist,
right?
And then to speak further to that, Braulio Estima, one time I was at a seminar of his, and he was explaining that exact same thing too. He's like, man, look, the essence of it is you're just trying to, break the arm this way. He's like, you're attacking the shoulder by, getting this bend in the arm. How you connect the hands, and all that is a little arbitrary at that point. It's about moving the limb into that range where it's going to, receive the damage a certain way, So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think people get a little caught up in what they think it should look like and not necessarily like what the essence of it really is.
Good point. All right. What about chokes? We'll just say either Darce or rear naked choke. What are finer details on that, and what's maybe commonly missed at times?
I think chokes, like what we always call chokes, whether they're chokes or strangulations or whatever, people get weird about language these days. But I think that like this is a point that I like to bring up whenever I'm talking about chokes, especially something like a classical like rear naked choke, is that every choke that we do or strangle or whatever that we're going to do is typically going to have like three elements to it. It's going to be air, pain, and blood. So we want to focus on the blood because that's going to put the person to sleep the fastest if we restrict that blood flow to the brain, And there's a lot like anatomically and physiologically happening during one of those that it's, it gets really deep into, but that's the biggest thing we want to focus on is clean as we can, blocking those arteries or constricting those arteries. Every choke is going to be painful to some degree, Every choke is going to be restricting on the air to some degree, but it's like, if you concentrate too much on like the trachea for chokes, then the muscles of the neck can tend to armor that a little better. So people can hold out and resist a tracheal choke a little better sometimes, even if it's more painful. Pain is kind of a wash, I just always like to say that pain is a lot less reliable. If you're going to cause somebody pain, it needs to have intention behind it. And the intention shouldn't be just trying to make them give up from that pain. This is why things like pressure points and stuff like are just kind of not garbage, but they're just kind of silly sometimes whenever you start seeing like whole systems that are based around pressure points. Right. It's like, yeah, if we do something painful in practice, I may have this like big reaction, but you get adrenaline pumping, we're in a fight or even just a competition, and that pain response is going to be extremely unreliable. You don't know what kind of effect it's truly going to have. So, if you prioritize in something like a choke, you prioritize the restriction of the blood, you're going to be a lot more technical and a lot more efficient. You're going to save more energy that way.
That's a great point because, someone can be really drunk or just adrenalized, like you said, or on God knows what kind of drugs or something. And all those change how much you're going to be able to keep them complying through pain because their perception of it won't be as intense. So, but you restrict the blood flow on those arteries, it doesn't matter. They're going out, right?
Yeah, so Grandmaster Elio said that. He's like,
right.
there's no tough guys to the choke.
That's right.
So it's
That's it. That's it. Okay. What about, last one, we'll move on to something else. What about on the bottom of side control? What's some important elements and what's maybe missed frequently?
Well, I got to give the standard black belt professor answer first. Is don't get there.
Okay. Right.
That's
You've already screwed up, right?
Yeah. You screwed up a long time ago. So but if so guard pass prevention, guard retention, those things are very important, obviously. But I think that the biggest thing with side control is just recognizing like how it's going to be oppressive positionally, and how it's going to best lend the person on top the ability to attack. And if you think about those things, you can kind of reverse engineer what you need to be doing on bottom, and you don't need to be hanging out there. A lot of times we get into like 100% defense mode, and I think that that's very dangerous. It's something I've been getting on to people a lot about lately. It's like, man, don't go 100% defense, because you're just putting a tourniquet on, and you're still going to die from that. So be active and sometimes aggressive in your defense, so that you never allow that person on top to stop and settle and prioritize their attacking ability and really, get comfortable attacking you. I like to, like everything else, theoretically, I like to, whether I do a good job at it or not, I like to follow the idea of using complementary energies. So like if my primary defense or escape opportunity is going to be something that's more of a pushing energy and a driving energy, then I need to already have in the chamber something for when and if that fails. So, I need to have a complementary thing. So if you watch kind of the tutorial I did I've got a couple videos where it's in it about escaping side control. I like to block that arm coming around from getting underneath my neck. I don't like that to happen, because it can really make a miserable crossface. So, if I do a decent job, and there's good ways to do that, to block that from coming around, they're going to have the response of either they're going to sit out to like a queso, to like scarf hold, or they're going to try to throw that arm to the other side of my head. And then I've got answers for both of those. Theoretically, I'm not saying that, I'm going to stop anybody,
sure.
But it's just structurally, mechanically, theoretically, it's a solid system. Once, depending on what that is, then, I have escape opportunities from, do they sit out to queso? Do they throw the arm to the other side of the head? If I start those escape opportunities and they reposition their body to help shut that down, then now they have to create space, though. That's the thing. They cannot move without creating space. And as long as you recognize where that space is and how to functionally use it and fill that space to accentuate your ability to upgrade rather than their ability to upgrade, then you're winning that moment in time, and that's really what it's about. So it's, you make space and then you fill space, or you see space made and you fill space.
Nice.
So.
Nice. All right. Let's, thanks for that insight in those positions, by the way. Really good stuff.
Yeah.
You, and along the lines of your teaching and video, your YouTube channel, recently got over 100,000?
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. That's great. Tell us a little bit about that channel and what your mission is with that channel. What do you want to accomplish with that?
Well, it's crazy to me that it's like taken off the way it has, and I'm very happy. I'm very grateful. Like I try to take every opportunity to like express that to anybody that's like subscribed or watches any of my stuff. And I get the nicest messages sometimes. I get, silly comments and stuff too sometimes, but I get comments just blow me away sometimes, that how people are thanking me, people that live like in Australia, people live in like India, like it's nuts. Like some of these people saying like, I don't have anywhere to train around here, but this gives me a resource that I can train with my kid, or I can train with my wife, or I can train with a friend, and those are the things that make me feel great. And I think that's the biggest thing that I hope that channel does for anybody, is like, I'm giving somebody resources that ultimately I hope just like supplement their training, and they have some facility where they have actual training and everything, and they have instructors and they have a student base that they can train with. That's my hope, is that supplemental. But I like that there's even people that watch it and they're like, man, I've never trained jiu-jitsu. I don't train jiu-jitsu currently, but I enjoy watching your videos because, even though I do Krav Maga, like this is helpful to me, the things that you're saying, like, and that's been the one of the most beautiful things that it's been doing for me. Is like, I'm all about like wanting to bridge gaps between people. We talked before about kind of the fragmentation of jiu-jitsu in the modern era about, this self-defense person over here is putting down this sport person over here who's putting down MMA, who's, putting down whatever. And it's like, man, jiu-jitsu is like one of the most like beautiful things to me, art forms to me. And I want to like get rid of some of that fragmentation,
yes.
some of those arguments. I think it's destructive to it. It's ultimately an eye for an eye is going to leave everybody blind in that kind of context, so.
There should be one flag, jiu-jitsu flag, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, and then, I don't have to agree with, I don't have to love somebody playing worm guard,
Right,
I mean,
right.
I don't have to love somebody playing donkey guard, but why do I have to put it down if I don't love it? It's kind of silly,
I agree. And when I say one flag, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have your association or whatever organization,
sure.
but we should have respect for all of them and still remember we're all love jiu-jitsu. But like you said, you don't have to love every single little part or piece, but to each their own, right?
Yeah, and that kind of makes me think too. I always like to make the distinction and make the statement that I use the moniker Knight Jiu-Jitsu, but in no way whatsoever am I trying to make that sound like the same way that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu sounds or anything like that. Like I'm not trying to sound like I have created something. I owe like the overwhelming majority of my knowledge to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, like the Gracie family, above everything else. But at the same time, I have a deep respect and appreciation for the 10th Planet system. I have
absolutely
a deep appreciation for other elements of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and of more Americanized Jiu-Jitsu, like in the modern era that can't even hardly be called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu any longer. I have a deep appreciation for catch wrestling and wrestling in general. And yes. I think that one of the greatest things to me, and I still say this to this day, is that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, in my opinion, wasn't a modified version of Jiu-Jitsu. It was a modifiable version of Jiu-Jitsu because the Gracie family, the way that they convey that information, and also there was some assimilation that had to have taken place. It just is. It's recognizable. If you look at the classical Jiu-Jitsu or Judo style of, like say, a double leg takedown, a Morote Gari from back in the day. And first of all, who knows where that even came from? I mean, that could have come from wrestling somewhere in India,
right.
thousands of years ago. But let's say, you do take something that was classically judo, jiu-jitsu, double leg takedown. Well, if you look at how most double legs and single leg takedowns happen today, looks a lot more like freestyle wrestling, than anything else. And that's perfectly fine. And it can still be jiu-jitsu if we absorb something from somewhere else. That's what Hickson and Hollis like back in the day, going to sambo tournaments and to wrestling tournaments and judo tournaments and getting this stuff, and then coming out and doing. I remember watching Hoyler and Hickson doing a demo in like a Vale Tudo demo, and they're throwing like Muay Thai round kicks and doing like clinch work and throwing jab cross, and Western boxing style hands, and it's like it's all still jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu is the vehicle. Jiu-jitsu is the methodology and the modality for which it's conveyed. So from a philosophical standpoint, I consider most everything I do to be jiu-jitsu, even if I'm, doing something that's obviously technically from more boxing, kickboxing, whatever. It's the philosophy and the methodology with which I'm transferring that information and how I understand how it works. Then
I completely agree, man. Open-mindedness, and there's different ways to honor your lineage, the foundations, or your history, and the creators, or at least the great people in that system. Some people, and you see this in Bruce Lee obviously was a huge innovator, right? But even with his Jeet Kune Do, you've got people fractionated in that now, because he never meant it to be a set system. It was more of a philosophy: absorb what is useful. But there's people that are, this part of Jeet Kune Do or that, and same with Jiu-Jitsu or anything else, that you honor the lineage by never changing it, keeping it pure. And the others say, no, you honor it by continually evolving it. So different philosophies. I like the evolving. And like you said, pulling from different places. I think Hickson and Hulls were really great being open-minded in that too. So, yeah. Even with structured systems like, you mentioned Henner and Hedron, they, in their current curriculum, they teach, you mentioned 10th Planet, they teach the twister and the truck in it. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is. I mean, if you're not growing and you're not evolving, you're dying. I mean, it just is. I mean, you can't. It's really hard to find something that is perfectly evolved and perfectly adapted to where it doesn't ever need to be touched again.
Right.
You know, and you can argue the flip side too of like, just if you don't have a proper lens to inspect something else that comes along, and you're too quick to jump on and say, "Oh, I found a better way to do this." It's like, well, I've been bitten by that a few times because, I've like seen how somebody else does like an Americana or something, and then started doing it that way, and then go back and watch Royce reteach something and be like, oh, it was just my lack of understanding of those
right.
details that made it seem. But it can go either way. I think the biggest thing is just to stay open-minded about it and not be too intransigent about it. So.
I agree, and that's the flip side. The other side is that you get attracted to anything that's new and shiny. Oh, that's great, and don't stay kind of into what your foundation is. But open-mindedness, but staying grounded as well. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So I'll put a link to your YouTube channel because for anybody who hasn't seen your videos, they are phenomenal. I'm not surprised at all that it's building up so well. What about? And you recently did something with BJJ Fanatics, right?
Yes. Yeah. I went up to Boston to film with those guys, and talked to Michael Zinga, and then I met Bernardo up there, and it was really, really cool. Michael actually like reached out to me and said that he had been talking to some people in the BJJ community and asked if he was interested in BJJ Fanatics, like if they were going to do like a self-defense series, who do they need to talk to? And he got my name back a couple times, particularly from some people that he really respects. And so that made me feel really good because, I have so much respect for so many people in the jiu-jitsu community on so many fronts. And for me to get respect back, among some of those peers, like that's really cool. So I talked to him and I was like, man, I think that'll be a good fit because like for you to have BJJ Fanatics, but to have like some people from other martial arts come in to show self-defense stuff, it's kind of weird, I mean, it's not that it shouldn't be done. I mean, of course, draw from the best sources, but I'm a jiu-jitsu guy that's concentrating mostly on self-defense stuff, and I like to show the connections between how things in more of a competitive grappling environment can translate to that, and fairly directly. So that was kind of the thesis, like the kind of theme of it is. It is self-defense. I'm going from like all through positions. It's more heavily related to the ground too, because a lot of times this is something weird that I kind of came across. It's like when you say self-defense, and let's say jiu-jitsu self-defense, okay? When you say that to people outside of the jiu-jitsu community, then they picture BJJ. They picture people rolling around on the ground,
Right.
But you say jiu-jitsu self-defense to jiu-jitsu guys, to BJJ guys, they picture like old school standing collar grabs and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird. It's the same thing, but it's just how it's perceived. So my hope with what I filmed with BJJ Fanatics, whenever it gets released and everything, is that it has a little bit more universality and the appeal. Like jiu-jitsu guys will be interested in picking it up to see something that they're familiar with, and how maybe they didn't realize what they were doing can already translate into more self-defense kind of elements. And people outside the jiu-jitsu community they're kind of turned off by the sport of it initially will pick it up because it's heavily into talking about self-defense considerations. Mm-hmm. So
I think it's great.
I'm really hoping.
Big props to you for that and being recognized as a kind of a subject matter expert in that place and the go-to guy. So also I admire that you're bridging that divide, like you said. There's camps that are really making the divide a little bigger in their philosophy of either sport or self-defense, but there's so much more in common than there are different. There may be a little bit of how you manage the distance different in this situation and that one, but there's so much more that are alike, and I like how you're showing that and going off that. So cool.
Yeah.
Eli,
I'd prefer for people to, no, we don't have to agree on everything, but I'd rather people, just calm down a little bit and not make things worse.
I completely agree. What about, what does Eli do off the mat, man? What do? You have any hobbies off the mat or anything like that?
Man, not a lot of time. Like, it's not just because I'm training a lot. I train a decent amount. I teach quite a bit, but whenever you kind of operate in the social media sphere, then, it's still like jiu-jitsu related, so I mean, it's like, during the week I have quite a few private lessons I teach and quite a few group classes I teach, but then, I'm also, just trying to stay up on, because I do put a lot of videos out, and my intention behind the videos is not like I said before, I'm not just trying to show off. I'm trying to share information that I think people can find useful. So if I'm truly doing that, I feel like I have a bit of a, not obligation, but a bit of a responsibility to interact with the people who are viewing it. So I try not to let any comments or questions go unanswered as best I can. And like I said, I got, it's like 110,000, 111,000 now subscribers that I'm getting like a lot of comments like on these videos, especially ones that are getting like, tens of thousands of views, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm the reason, because I'm grateful, I want, if somebody comments on it and they have a question, or they, just have like a grateful comment or something, then I want to respond to that the best I can. I can't get to all of them, but I try my best. So that in itself is another job.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like hobbies or anything like that, I don't really have many hobbies. I just, I hang with my daughter as much as I can, hang with my girlfriend as much as I can, and I I'm trying to do better, and I try to do the best I can to like turn that stuff off. Every chance I get to have quality time and not be working. When I'm with them. So,
that's great.
And they're very patient with me, and they're very loving and everything. And so I try to be the best I can for them, but that's about it, man.
You gotta be in the moment and fully present with who you're with, right?
Absolutely.
Do you want to say your daughter or girlfriend's name?
Sure. Yeah. My daughter. I don't put a lot of stuff like out about either of them on social media, just because a couple of reasons. One is like I feel like people mostly just like they come to me because of the jiu-jitsu stuff, right. the fighty stuff, as we call it, between me and her and them. So it's like that. I tend not to share a lot of personal stuff or whatever. But yeah, my daughter's name is Kendall, and she's 15, and she's I pretty much like structure my whole world around her. And my girlfriend Anya, she actually lives in North Carolina, and it's my first like really long distance relationship, and we've been together for not a terribly long time, and we've been making it work the best we can. So we're trying to collapse that space a little bit to make things closer in our worlds. But it's those people like keep me sane on some days, along with jiu-jitsu and in this crazy world. So
right on. Well, to bring it to a close, Eli, I know you probably have a ton of people that have had a huge impact on your life, but if you had to pick one or two of the people that have had the biggest impact on your life, either on or off the mat, who would come to mind?
Yeah, man, there's so many. Like, the short, most obvious answer would be, Royce had obviously a big impact in the Gracie family, because of how, the trajectory that it set me on and everything. But I think even prior to, and ultimately as impactful, more impactful, would be Jason Hawkins, the gentleman that I mentioned, he's actually the owner of the school that I teach out of, and he's the one that I've been with for decades, and first introduced me to jiu-jitsu and into martial arts, like the universe of martial arts information out there. And I still consider him one of the most like brilliant martial arts minds that I've ever met. He just has a natural aptitude and insight that's just unparalleled. And for that reason too, because I've been around him for so long, like he's very much a mentor to me, not just in martial arts or jiu-jitsu sphere, but beyond that. He's just intellectually, philosophically, everything. I have the utmost esteem for him. And then some of the other guys that I've come up with during that same time that we've all been together. One of my best friends, Jerrod Jessup, you see him in some of the videos with me. And, I continually learn so much. He's got such a unique approach to jiu-jitsu. He's actually in the videos with BJJ Fanatics when they come out with me too.
Nice.
And so he's also a second degree black belt under Royce Gracie. And we've shared our entire experience together. And so, yeah, those guys and, so many others, like too many to name here. And I've got great training partners, and, I'm very fortunate to know the people I know and to have access to the resources I have. And so, I'm grateful, and I want to share that with everybody.
That's awesome. And you in turn are really bringing it full circle and making a great impact on many other lives at the school, but also with your seminars, and then also with your YouTube channel. So props to you, man, for spreading it. And how great is it to live in this age where you can get to so many different people through the medium of online videos and stuff. That's great, right? So
it's phenomenal, man. I mean, it's never lost on me for a second the fact that I can have a conversation with a guy in Scotland, and he's watched like videos that I've put out, and he likes them, and he like is getting information, and I'm helping in some kind of little way, with a detail that he wouldn't have otherwise gotten, that's awesome. I mean, it's really cool, man. And I think I think it should be used with the dysfunction of social media and all the misuse of it. Like, if anybody that's using it positively, I think needs to do extra work, because it needs to be something that has more of a positive impact on people's life and livelihood and lifestyle than it does spread like awful stuff and cyberbullying and just negativity.
Well said. Well said. I completely agree. Well, I know I'll share in the show notes your channel, and also I know you have a Patreon page where people can support you if they're digging your work and everything. So I'll have that up as well, because a lot of fresh content goes up there. Man, much respect to you. Thank you for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. I know everybody's going to enjoy hearing this. Any closing comments you have?
No, just gratitude, man. I'm grateful to be on here and to be talking to you. And I got a lot of respect for your show and the things that you're doing and the people you're talking to and getting, like you were saying, getting that information out there. Like you're doing awesome stuff. And it's an honor and privilege for me to be on here. So thank you for taking the time with me.
Well, thank you, my brother. I really appreciate it. And a long, healthy, and happy life to you.
You too, man.
All right. Cheers. All right. Have you checked out the Breathing for BJJ program? If not, you got to check it out. Did you know your lung capacity diminishes every year that you're alive? As an older practitioner, this certainly is important. So you need something that's going to keep that vitality up and help your performance be consistent at a high level. Perhaps you're a younger person new to Jiu Jitsu, and you tend to feel panicky in certain situations or positions, or you just don't feel like you have the ability to regulate your breath very well yet. This program is certainly designed for you as well. And maybe you've been in Jiu Jitsu for many years and you're a seasoned practitioner and you have a high-level game, but feel like maybe there's something missing. Maybe that joy isn't quite there like it used to be. Adding breathing at a high level and learning to breathe at a high functional level can really bring back the oomph and the joy in your jiu-jitsu and totally transform your jiu-jitsu experience. So whether you fit into one of these categories or something else, I urge you to check out how you can take your jiu-jitsu to a whole new level by the power of breathing. Check out breathingforbjj.com. All right, up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Time now for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Today's session is called See the Gold. When I'm happy, I see the happiness in others. When I'm compassionate, I see the compassion in other people. When I'm full of energy and hope, I see opportunities all around me. When I'm angry, I see the hypocrisy in you. When I'm depressed, I notice that your eyes look sad. When I'm weary, I see the world as boring and unattractive. If I drive into a city and complain, what a crowded, smog-ridden mess this place is, I'm really expressing what a crowded, smog-ridden mess I am at that moment. Because if I had been feeling great that day and full of hope and happiness, I could just as easily have said while driving into that city, wow, what a thriving, energetic metropolis this is. Again, I would have been describing my inner landscape, not that particular city. In every circumstance, we can look for the gold or look for the filth. And what we look for, we find. The best starting point for self-motivation is in what we choose to look for in what we see around us. Do we see opportunity everywhere? Our self-motivation suffers most from how we choose to see the circumstances in our lives. That's because we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. When I open my eyes in the morning, said Colin Wilson, I am not confronted by a world, but by a million possible worlds. It is always your choice. What world do you want to see today? Opportunity is life's gold. It's all you need to be happy. It's the arena in which you self-create. So keep this in mind going through your day, your week, your month. Your opportunities will multiply when you choose to see them. And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page, and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.graciejujitsurocks.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.